Right, hello, greetings. It's Dr. Thomas Daffern here, welcome. It's my weekly Sunday fasting talk. Today is the last day of May, which is one of my favourite months. It's a beautiful month. It's the first real month of summer. Beltane starts it. And today is the day of Joan of Arc, great patron saint of France, who I've learned to respect since moving to France, actually. Even more than I did before. And so, as you know, I'm doing a series of talks every Sunday since starting this, and in this last week I've been cataloguing them all, and it's quite an interesting journey it's been actually since I started this like nearly 2 years ago. What a journey. And now I'll be addressing not just Brexit and the madness that represents, but the madness of the tragedy of Israel-Palestine not being able to sort out a peace deal, the COVID crisis that we're suffering from without really knowing its cause, 3.5 million people dead, you know. My job as a philosopher is to look at all these things in their joined-upness. I'm interested in ethics and peacemaking. The world is not at peace, this is unpeace. In Argentina, the COVID rates are horrible, really, really critical. You know, we're not at peace here. So where is the peace? How can we find it? To me, these are symptomatic of the problems deeper down. My friend Adam Keller, professor of peace studies at the University of Bradford, used to say, peace studies is like trying to attend to the fire in the peat, which is down below the surface of the land. If the fire catches in the peat, it can flare up anywhere. And violence, aggression, you know, ignorance, which are the causes of violence, are deep down in the peat. And my job as a philosopher is to try and find out the causes of all these interconnected phenomena. And I'll do my best. That's the point of these talks, really. And I regard it as a kind of medical work. If we're going to diagnose the planetary problems and get to planetary healing, which is what I want, we can't do that till we've diagnosed the problems. Obviously it's a problem partly in human nature, and so we have to self-diagnose. What is it in me? What egotism, what ignorance, what fear, what hatred? You know, we all have these qualities in us. We can't just project and say it's them, it's those horrible people. No, the human being itself, we have these problems. But we can rise above them. That's the point of our spirituality, the point of studying psychology, philosophy, education is to mature so that we transcend our egotistical nature and appreciate what Marx called the species being, our true humanity, our wisdom element. Where is that? It's dormant in all of us, I believe, but it's an inner work we will have to do, but we can help each other socially and through friendships and you know, with your close friends and students and so on, to bring out that species essence. So that's what I'm trying to do here. The first thing I want to say, to report back on, is that we just had the World Intellectual Forum meeting today. That's the 30th of the month. Every month it's the last day, the 30th. And today was a good meeting. We heard from a neuroscientist talking about the nature of love. We heard from our friend in Israel talking about the horrors of the conflict they've been living through and her analysis of its causes and its possible solutions. And we heard from other speakers, and you'll be able to listen to that, you know, as a separate talk on this channel. I think I made some comments there I just want to repeat about maybe the solution to the Middle East crisis. I set up this Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East in naivety in about 2008-9, made a documentary film, went to the Jerusalem, visited Temple Mount, you know, outside. I wasn't allowed in. It was one of those days when it was closed, unfortunately. But I went to the eastern wall where this golden gate is locked, and I realised that's very symbolic. If only we could open that, all of us together, collectively, you know, Muslim, Christian, Jew, Palestinian, Israeli, Hebrew, French, English, Jordanian, Lebanese, you know, it's a symbol for peace worldwide, that Temple Mount. And yet what's happening now is it's been the fulcrum of this fighting. Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now my Israeli friend today claimed that that's where they've been stockpiling all kinds of terrorist stuff, and that's why the Israeli police attacked it. I don't know if that's true. I mean, let's have an inquiry. If it's not true, then that's propaganda, which maybe some people believe, but it may not be true. I think it's very unlikely. That I don't think the Palestinians would be that stupid as to start piling terrorist equipment in Al-Aqsa Mosque. They know that that's a stupid thing. So I suspend judgment. That's my duty as chair of the TRC for the Middle East. But it should be inquired into. The trouble is, who is there who's neutral, who can do that? She also said today that the WACF, the Jordanian appointed committee that controlled the religious sites of the Temple Mount, were trying to, sort of calm down the radical Palestinians who were trying to make it a flashpoint of protests and so on. Again, I don't know if this is true. If it's true, let's see the evidence. I will write to the WACF and try and find out if it's true. If it's not true, then again it's just propaganda that maybe has been shown on Israeli television, and Israelis believe. They certainly believe that this is true and that Al-Aqsa Mosque houses dangerous heretics, terrorists. Well, I don't know. I think it's unlikely, as I say, and I'll suspend judgment until I see proof. What I think is that that whole sensitive area shouldn't be policed by the Israeli Defense Force. I think it should be policed by a UN special. What we need is a kind of UN peacekeeping force to go in. A friend of mine is writing a master's thesis on peacekeeping and meditation, and for UNITAR, and I hope that that thesis will, advance. And the idea of hers is, why can't these peacekeeping forces be equipped with meditation capacities and knowing about how to diffuse and calm down mobs and so on? That would be a much better path to go than this periodic mob violence, which then the Israeli Defense Force comes and, well, it seems to me from outside, it helps to incite. But again, we don't know enough, whether it's incitement or response or, who's responsible here. But the international community, we must care about this. We must try and do all we can to diffuse these tensions and to bring some reason to bear on the situation. That's what our meeting was trying to do today. We didn't, unfortunately, hear from our Palestinian World Intellectual Forum colleagues. And, there's a lot of deep sharing and conversing to be done to heal these traumas, because everyone's traumatized here. I've been interested in this case and issue for a long time. I attended a conference way back at University College in the 1990s when I first set up my Peace Institute, chaired by a man called Michael Safia, who taught in UCL then, about Jerusalem. What can we do? And in those days, you see, in the mid-90s, people were hopeful for peace. We had the Oslo Peace Accords, we had discussions going on. And we were discussing, well, how do we run a Jerusalem if it's two states capital? Who would run the transport? Who would run the water supply? Who would make sure the electricity's there for everyone? They were very detailed discussions Michael Safia had initiated in the planning department at UCL. What's happened to those discussions? Where are they going on? What I don't like is that under Trump and Netanyahu, the conversation sort of moved in a rather sinister direction, which is, we will just take over everything. We will just chuck all the Palestinians out of their bits of East Jerusalem. We will commandeer their housing, and we will just, they don't have any rights, because we control the legal system. So there's been some interesting revelations about the Abu Jarrah site in East Jerusalem, these houses that are being commandeered. They're owned by offshore companies and trusts which can be traced back through the Cayman Islands and so on back to the USA. This is the face of international capitalism, owning, buying up properties, pushing Palestinians out of their homes, and then using the courts to say, no, this is our right, we bought this property. Well, no, hang on, these are Palestinian homes and have been for centuries. So again, it's a skewed kind of legal system that makes this possible. And that's what capitalism does, you know. If you look at Tolstoy's view on ownership of land, he's rather scathing. He says, no, you know, land is sacred. It brings sacred memories, and you can't really buy and sell land. And you know, it's a home. It's somewhere that a people has a spiritual link to. The American Indians knew this, and the Palestinians know this. They're the indigenous people of that land. And as I talked last week about the great first chancellor of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Rabbi Magnus, you know, he knew that there has to be a unity solution to this, which can only come from a unity of consciousness. Anyway, I'll continue to work on that. And he ran this movement called Ihad about unity of spiritual consciousness and purpose. After all, if there is one God, you know, which most philosophers think that it must be some absolute unity at the core of it all, well, how dare we keep going on with all this tribalism? Why have we parceled God into these separate little tribes of me-ness versus you-ness? Surely that unity consciousness transcends that egotism. So we have a huge job to do, folks, as intellectuals, as thinkers, as just normal, decent human beings, to encourage our Palestinian Israeli brothers and sisters to embrace each other as long-lost relatives. So that's one of the things we talked about, and I think we need a commission to get a Palestinian state going. I've reached the point of lack of patience, as I've said before, with waiting for Israel to green light the two-state solution. Every nation in the world, apart from Israel, wants a two-state solution. I think I'm right in saying that. At the UN Security Council, every single foreign minister, from Pakistan to Mauritius to Morocco to Jordan, everywhere, said two states is the only answer. The only one that's not saying that is Israel. And, you know, it's time to end that monopoly. It's a blockade that's being done. And how are we going to do that? Well, I've been waiting around for 20 years for Israel to say, you all want a two-state, well, here you are, here's a state. And I realised that's a bit fanciful. That's not how real politics works. You know, the people that want a Palestinian state have to stand together, stand up, non-violently, peacefully, and wisely. Christ, who was actually a Bethlehem-born, you know, Palestinian rebel activist for peace, said, you have to be as wise as a serpent, but innocent as a dove. And many of the Palestinians are actually still Christians, and some of them are probably descendants of Christ. When I went to visit in Palestine, you know, some of these amazing Arab Christians who speak, obviously, Arabic, but they also have a lot of Syriac connections, and Aramaic, which was the language of Christ, is morphed into Syriac, and their holy scriptures are in Syriac. It's an Orthodox church community. These are noble people and descendants, some of them, of Christ, and, you know, not Christ directly, but his family, as it were. Well, we ought to honour them. They're precious people, these. And the Israelis I know and love, they want a peace. They want a two-state solution, but it's the government that's not letting it happen. Netanyahu particularly has this sort of psychopathic denial of peace. And he's a real blockade to this. So what do? Well, there's no point waiting around for him to fall from power and the Israelis to vote in a reasonable politician. It's not going to happen, you know, if we keep waiting. So I think what we have to do is organise a commission. I call it ICEPS, an International Commission for the Establishment of a Palestinian State. You know, and every country in the world can join this. Every single foreign minister can join it. And we have to have some very detailed discussions. When I was friends with Afif Safia in London, he used to come to my meetings at the House of Lords. He was the Palestinian representative to London. He said, Thomas, you know, we need peace. We want a Palestinian state. We don't want violence with Israel. The minute we get our state, we want to join the Commonwealth. They want to join the Commonwealth with Australia and Canada and Pakistan, 53 other nations. Well, I would welcome them to join the Commonwealth. I set up the Commonwealth Interfaith Network. You know, we want an independent Palestine to join the Commonwealth could then help it build. You know, there's a lot of money in Commonwealth countries like Canada and Australia and New Zealand and Pakistan. We would want to help Palestine get off the floor. They've been kneeling like George Floyd with the Israeli Defense Forces on their necks for, you know, too long. And the reason the Israelis are doing this is because of their fear. They are terrified of an independent Palestinian state, and, you know, what if they keep firing rockets at us? You know, they want to defeat us and throw us into the sea. That's the word on the Israeli street. Not among the intellectuals who've studied peace, but among the ordinary people. They're terrified, and this is pumped out in the media all the time. So, the Commission, ICEPS, will have to address this problem by looking at the existing Palestinian constitutions, both the Hamas one and the the official Palestinian state one, and ensuring that non-violence and a peace treaty is written into that constitution. The minute they get their independent state, automatically it's a non-violence thing. But that has to work both ways. You see, the Palestinian Accords that Netanyahu and Trump signed, which is here, it was called Peace to Prosperity, a vision to improve the lives of the Palestinian and Israeli people. Now, I love this document. I've read it and gone through it, and I've put footnotes to it, because I'm the only guy that's written a commentary on this. I don't know why, but my peace studies colleagues seem to be thin on the ground these days. But somebody had to do it, and I've done it. And what I've said is there are the good points, about 25% of it are very good. Then there are the bad points, which will need revising. We need Palestinians to sit round with Russians, Americans, the Quartet, the EU, and totally change 75% of it, but keep the good bits. Now, the good bits are that there's a railway connection between Gaza and the West Bank, so Palestinians can move freely between the two. When I went to Bethlehem and talked to young Palestinian women, their big problem was they couldn't go on the beach. They wanted to swim in the summer, like anyone normal. If they have a railway, they can pop down to Gaza and have a nice swim, and come back in the evening. Now, that would be a normal state. That Palestinian state could be amazing. The other good thing in here is they want to give Palestinians a East Jerusalem airport so that tourists and pilgrims can fly into Jerusalem to visit the Muslim holy sites, which there are millions in Palestine. The other great thing about this document is they want to let freedom of pilgrimage in all Palestine and all Israel. So if I'm a Palestinian Muslim and I want to visit a Muslim holy site in Israel, I can, and vice versa. So, for that to happen, we need to get confidence built, peace-building measures. It's about changing attitudes through education. And so, for instance, it needs a lot of work, for educators. And I'd like to see Palestinian and Israeli educators sitting down. They could devise a common core peace curriculum that could be taught in all Israeli and all Palestinian schools and universities. I'd like a peace studies department in all Israeli and all Palestinian universities. And that could be funded by the Commonwealth and the UN and other sources, UNESCO. UNESCO peace chairs could be established. So that's my mission as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. And I think until we get an independent Palestinian state pledged to peace, the Israelis will go on being terrified and keep bombing Gaza. It'll be a cycle of endless wars. And until Hamas, also pursue the path of peace, I think they're ready to. I don't buy this thing that they're perpetually trying to wipe out Israel. Maybe I'm naive. I'd be happy to have a dialogue with Hamas leaders. Please, if you're in touch with anyone in Hamas, put me in touch with them, I don't believe Hamas are that stupid as to want to, you can't defeat Israel militarily. It can't be done. I mean, they have a fearsome army, nuclear weapons, all the rest of it. Of course they can't defeat them militarily. The only way to follow is the path of peacemaking, which is what Islam and Christianity are both about. Muhammad said, make peace if you can. Try 99 times to get peace and reconciliation. Well, let's keep trying. Let's do it. look at this document and let's revise it together. So anyway, that's my first thing I want to say, and I feel passionately about this because I love that land. I've been to Galilee, I've sat on the hill where Christ gave the Sermon on the Mount, I've been to the Church of Mary Magdalene on the Mount of Olives, I've sat outside the gate, the Golden Gate, and I've wondered, isn't it time we got this open? It's been shut for 500 years, and poor humanity is going down here. If not now, when, as Rabbi Hillel said. And that requires all of us to step up and be peacemakers. And I don't care if you're a rabbi, an imam, a priest, a monk, a nun, a normal person, a housewife, you know, a teacher. Let's all get with this peace message and persuade our dear friends to make love, not war. Okay, the second thing I want to move on to and share, which I'm very excited about, is a couple of days ago I was invited to an online presentation of the Luxembourg Peace Awards. And I was invited last week to this, and it was a great honour to be. I didn't really know they existed before. I was told about this, and it was watching these prizes being given out, and it was awesome. I've fallen in love with Luxembourg. It's a tiny little country. It's the heart of the European Union. And in my research for my Druid encyclopedia, I discovered it's all Druid country. In Luxembourg, they found these Celtic remains. And Luxembourg was a Druid paradise. So anyway, the University of Luxembourg hosted this amazing Luxembourg Peace Prize presentation. And it's been founded, I don't know, about 10 years ago by some wealthy people who've given the facilities to present these laureates. And it's not just one, it's not like the Nobel Peace Prize, there's about 8 or 10 given out each year. 4 different categories. And I just want to share a few of them because they were so amazing. The first guy that got an award is a guy called Steve Keller from Australia, who is an economist and a successful businessman. He knows how the economy works. But he's devoted, and he's quite wealthy, devoted his life to developing what he calls the Peace Index. You know, instead of measuring a country by how much power and wealth it's got, or its GDP, or how much its weapons are, how much it spends on militarism, we think a country that does that is powerful, right? The UK is powerful because it has nuclear weapons. I mean, come on, that's a barbaric measure. That's like cavemen saying, I'm more powerful than you, I've got 100 stones and clubs, and you've only got 10. I mean, we ought to have grown out of that. No, Steve Keller has invented a very sophisticated way of measuring what he calls the Peace Index, which involves all kinds of things: quality of health care, education, gender equality, human rights, transparency for journalism, you know, very subtle indicators that it collectively aggregate to the Peace Index. And then he ranks different countries around the world. And also he monitors over time, so he showed us graphs like the last 10 or 20 years. Is the world getting more peaceful or not? You know, and it's varied. His figures are very interesting. On the whole, there's some hope of progress, but also in some of the most democratic, industrial, westernized societies, they're getting less peaceful. Britain is sort of imploding in post-Brexit trauma. The US is imploding in post-Trump trauma. And politics have become very, very polarized. And there's less media integrity and less communication sharing. This is Steve's finding. Anyway, he's got an institute he's set up, which is based in Australia, for peace and economics. He well deserved his prize. And then we heard from other people. We heard from an amazing guy in Kenya who is a photographer called Boniface Mwangi. He was an amazing, articulate young man who, I didn't know this, but in 2007, Kenya erupted into a civil war with horrendous killings and slaughterings because they didn't accept an election result. I mean, you know, And so armed gangs were roaming around slaughtering each other. And he was so horrified at this, because he's Kenya's quite a sophisticated culture. And he said, how can this be happening here? So he went out into the streets with his camera, very bravely, at some risk, and photographed these massacres taking place as a photographer. And he then made blown up photographs of the things he shot, which are quite horrendous, the sights. And then he made a travelling exhibition on, placards and walls and stuff. And he toured around Kenya, showing the horror of all this cruelty to the people themselves. And it acted as a kind of cathartic shock, because the ordinary people in Kenya are not like this. They're good people, like all of us everywhere. And they were so shocked that the exhibition itself helped end the killings and end the war and calm everybody down. So he well deserved his prize for art and photography and peace. Then there was a Palestinian-Israeli, Nasri Barghouti and Meron were jointly awarded for their project, A Land for All, 2 states, 1 homeland, which is a project of Israeli-Palestinian dialogue for peace. And they are trying to heal this division. They're moderate Israelis, moderate Palestinians, saying, let's share this sacred land. Let's have 2 states living side by side. And they won their award too, and justly, I think, in my understanding. Then there was a project called Water, Peace and Security, which is run out of Holland, which is an NGO that works with support from the Dutch government, Foreign Ministry. They're doing something very important. They're monitoring water conflicts around the world, because the resource of water is going to get more scarce as global warming picks up speed. And look what's happening in Antarctica and Arctic. The glaciers are melting more rapidly, and it's a growing crisis. And so they focused as a charity on water conflicts and how to resolve them. I didn't know, but Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan had just nearly gone to war over water. In Mali and Niger it's happening, Egypt and Ethiopia. And they've developed very sophisticated ways of monitoring water and conflict. So that was, impressive. Then we heard from Beatrice Buarque, a Brazilian peace researcher who's doing a thesis at the University of Manchester. And her charity is called Words Heal the World. Well, as a philosopher of language and a poet, I've invested a lot of my time and life into words, writing, poetry and prose, and song as well. And I believe words can heal the world. They're the only thing that can. And what causes the conflicts is words misspoken, misunderstood. And sometimes they ricochet back for generations, and they get into sacred texts, Bibles and so on, but they're misunderstood. That's why we need a radical new peace hermeneutic, which is what I'm trying to do with my commentaries on the Gospels and on the Quran and on the Ketuvim, the writings of the Hebrew Bible. Beatrice is doing great work, and she's looking at the use of words to stir peace and love on social media instead of hatred. There's a lot of misinformation swirling around on the internet, in social media. Well, no, we need to cut through that. How can we use social media for good, for peace, for love? And then there was an amazing artist from Mexico who won an award, Pedro Reyes, amazing artist who's doing peace art, and some of it was presented in a film. He's taking rifles and shotguns and pistols from well-known manufacturers like Beretta in Italy, which made rifles. He's cutting the barrels and turning them into like music boxes, soundscape things, literally cutting these things up and retooling them, and then putting them into a kind of cylindrical music box thing that you turn with a crank, and it plays a tune. So the one made of Italian rifles plays a Vivaldi piece. The one made of Austrian Glock barrels plays a Mozart piece. And this is so brilliant. He's an artist in Mexico, turning guns literally into musical instruments. And hats off to him. So yes, and he's working a lot also with the international campaign against nuclear weapons. And he's doing work around art, showing up the absurdity of nuclear war and nuclear weapons. I mean, it'd be lovely to turn some nuclear missiles into artworks. I don't know what we could do with them, but when they're decommissioned, make them into, I don't know, trees or something. And then we heard from the artist who's designed the peace chairs that were given out as the awards to the laureates. So hats off to the Luxembourg University. The Vice-Chancellor spoke, a very articulate, highly intellectual, great bilingualist, who spoke in, praise of the peace work that these Luxembourg laureates are doing. And then we heard from an amazing Luxembourg woman called Anne Brasseur. I'd not heard of her before. Hats off to her. She was, until recently, the president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And she's one of the leaders of the Liberal Democrats in Europe, which is like the ALDE, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe, of which the Lib Dems in Britain are members. And she was a highly intellectual woman. She reminded me of Simone Veil, who was the leader of the European Union Parliament, and similar type of amazingly impressive woman, highly intellectual and speaking out about human rights across the continent, the rights of women, the rights of minorities, the rights of refugees, and how we can build a Europe fit to live in and share. And not just Europe, but also in the Middle East. And these values of human rights, they're universal, they're not European. They belong to humanity, And so she spoke very movingly about that. She pointed out there are 70 million refugees worldwide. That's 70 million people that are not living in their homelands or don't have any security. Even 10 is too many. 70 million? We have to change this, folks. We have to change the world where we're pouring money into militarism. We have to turn our weapons into musical instruments and solve these problems. Indifference is the mildest form of intolerance. She quoted Karl Jaspers, the great philosopher, who said that. I experienced teaching in Britain when I was teaching peace studies and as a school teacher that so many kids and adults even are just indifferent. You tell them 70 million refugees in the world, they say, oh well, that's their problem. It's not ours. We're Brexit Britain, Fortress Britain, they can't come here. That's indifference, it's intolerance. And I oppose that attitude. You see, I'm with John Donne. No man is an island. We're all interconnected by the one great sea of being. Anyway, hats off to Anne Brasseur, great woman. Okay, and there was others. There was Steve Youngblood, who is running a Centre for Peace Journalism. He won the award for peace journalism. He's a professor of peace journalism at a university in America. And, immensely interesting chap. And then we heard from Barcelona. The city of Barcelona in Spain presented on their plan to create a walk of paths for peace. And the city of Barcelona has come up with this plan. You've got a unit working on it to turn the whole harbour front into a walk for peace. Starting at a gate, the old gate to the city of Barcelona. They're going to open it up, and then you walk along, I think it's 2 or 3 miles, and every now and then there's a sort of station where you can learn about a particular Nobel Peace Laureate. And they're really impressive. So that would be a really amazing walk, like a peace walk. And they also want a museum for peacekeepers in Barcelona.